Good news, everybody. It's all over. World War II and period 7 is over, not COVID outbreak 2019, 2020. That's still going on. But period 7's done. We are through World War II. Let me scroll down here. I lost my spot. We're through World War II. We're approaching period 8. There we go. We're getting into period 8, and we will get into the Cold War and civil rights and all that good stuff. So we have completed probably the longest and most in-depth period of the course, period 7. We'll review that here briefly in this video, and then at the end of the year, we'll go back through and review that. But you guys have looked at a lot of information. Even before our break, we re-examined what we'd gone over throughout this time period, and it's all surprising how many big topics in U.S. history are all sandwiched into this 1890 to 1945 time period. So yesterday we looked at end of the war or post-war diplomacy. Some of you answered the short answer essay question on Classroom. I've commented on those. You guys did a good job with those. But take a look at that. If you haven't done it yet, you want to go back and do it, that's fine. It's still up there available for you to work on. So we looked at post-war diplomacy. I'm not going to review that. You guys can go back and do that on your own. But one thing I do want to point your attention to is technically the last topic of period 7 that we're not going to go through in great detail because it's largely a review. But if we look at the very last topic, topic 7.15, comparison in period 7, we need to be able to compare the relative significance of the major events of the first half of the 20th century in shaping American identity. You guys can accomplish that objective by looking at that module in Khan Academy. There's a great video. You can see it over here. I'll have it linked on the Classroom page, Shaping American Identity, 1890-1945. As we look back at that time period, we go all the way back to the pre-20th century, late 19th century, where we're still talking about industrialization, the booming economy of pre-Depression, pre-World War I America, immigrants coming over in huge numbers. And then we go through this roller coaster of imperialism, and then isolationism, and then World War I, and then back to isolated. And in the middle of all that, economically, we're continuing to grow. We're figuring out what we want to do in terms of immigration. We're trying to figure out what to do in terms of rights for African Americans and women. We're really starting to question who we are as a country and what we want to be. And so when we finish up period 7, we certainly don't have all the answers to that question, but we have most definitely developed more of an American identity. So take a look at that video. It's only 8 minutes long. You guys like to put it on double speed or whatever it is you do. You've got 2 weeks off. Just watch the whole thing. You're in no hurry. But anyway, take a look at that. That'll help you with that review, that comparison. Let's scroll down to period number 8. Period 8 is very similar to period 7 in that it is full of very noteworthy events. It's a pretty heavy time frame in terms of the AP exam. There's a lot of weight put on the AP exam from this period as well as period 7. So it'll be important that we get through all this stuff and that you guys stay on track with it. Today is an easy one. Like always, we start by contextualizing the time period, looking at the events surrounding it. So we'll do that. Shouldn't take us very long. I'll mention a few big ideas to you guys and some resources and that kind of thing, and then we'll jump into it more with more detail tomorrow. So period 8 is a good one. Students tend to like this time period. It's, like I said before, as we got into period 7, it gets a little bit easier because of the language of documents. changes. We get a lot more videos, a lot more photos. We get color photography. We get all sorts of things that make it a little more appealing to us as 21st century folks. But that stuff will come later. What we want to do now is examine the context of the time period. So again, we're looking at 1945. When you see the year 1945, you automatically think end of, sorry, I'm scrolling a lot there, guys. I lost my spot. When you hear 1945, you automatically need to think about the end of World War II. 1945 is the year of the atomic bomb. August of 45 is when we dropped the atomic bomb. It's the year of the end of the war. It's a very happy year for the world as people get back to normal. But you have to recognize that right away. Okay, 1945, that's the end of the war. 1980, that's Cold War stuff. We'll get to that later. But you also have to recognize 1945 as the start of a new dawn for America. We are booming economically. We're a world power, and things are good. And we're going to start to address a lot of domestic issues that we have in this booming post-war period. So let's take a look at the objective. We'll run through this stuff, and then we'll be done. So explain the context for societal change from 1945 to 1980. So if you look over on the left here, I've put two questions up here. This one, what will America's role in the world be post-World War II? We addressed that a little bit yesterday, but we're going to look at a little more future material. So again, the war's ended. We're super powerful. We'll talk about this tomorrow, but our ally, who was the Soviet Union, or our ally, the Soviet Union, who we fought alongside in World War II, is now our enemy. And so a lot of what we look at in period 8 is this containment of communism. And so much of it goes back to the negotiations in and after World War II and the relationship between the United States, its leaders, and Russia and its leaders, and how the ideologies don't match up, and how they were frenemies throughout the war. They fought to end the evil of all evils, and that was Nazi Germany. But when it was done, they looked at each other and remembered, hey, we're not the same. We don't agree. And so a lot of what's going to happen in period 8 is predicated on that, the previous kind of underlying rivalry between those two nations. So after World War II, the U.S. is concerned with containing, the key word, containing communism. And part of doing that is establishing democracies in countries across the world. If you're making democracies, then you're fighting communism. So the U.S. focuses on that. The other question I want to look at is what domestic changes, because that's our objective here, societal change, what domestic changes will happen in the U.S. as a result of the war? I mentioned we're going to have an economic boom. We were booming before World War I in the early 1900s, had our depression, tried to get out of it on our own. World War II comes along, and guess what? It's production, making lots of stuff that gets us a victory in the war and also gets us out of that depression. And so we are booming at the end. I wrote here, for some people, we're going to talk about groups that were not necessarily receiving the benefit of that economic boom as we go. Other domestic changes, women, minority groups, we're going to see the civil rights movement as a key part of this time period. We get in the 50s, segregation is still a thing. Plessy versus Ferguson has not been overturned. Segregation is still legal in the United States. And so we're going to see the civil rights movement happen. We have a wave of feminism in the 70s and 80s. And I think we talked about this a little bit with Rosie the Riveter. We will look at that. The women can vote. They participate in wars. However, women in the workplace, that's equality is limited or non-existent. Women's roles in government are extremely limited. So we'll look at that as well. We're also going to see a generational divide. We have the boomer trend of today. That's nothing new. There is a youth-driven generational divide between people during the Vietnam War, which is a key part of the Cold War and Period 8. And so we'll look at that. The idea of counterculture will come up. And then lastly, technology keeps getting better and the environment keeps getting worse. We'll talk about good technological changes and progress that we have, but we'll also see the ill effects of that on the environment as we go. So all of that is stuff that goes on within the time period. Remember, context is before, during, or after. We've talked about before. We're actually going to cover a lot of that before stuff tomorrow when we get into the first topic that is not context, and that is the Cold War from 1945 to 1980. So we have to talk about the origins of that. A lot of that will go back to World War II. So we'll explore context some more there. But it's a really good period. You guys can see the topics here. We have Cold War, Red Scare, that's McCarthyism, things like that. The economy, the baby boom, 50s culture, which although predominantly white culture, still very influential and interesting. We see some of that stuff carry on today. Civil rights movement, America as a world power, Vietnam War, Korean War. Korea is not mentioned there, but we're going to look at the Korean War, the Great Society. I mentioned that with the New Deal because you guys need to be able to compare those two things. Civil rights movement continued. There's different approaches throughout the different decades in the civil rights movement, so we'll look at that. Youth culture in the 60s, the environmentalism and the changing status of the earth as countries develop. And then we'll get here to the end as we get toward the 80s. So that is the topic. Hopefully we get to explore this topic as a class in person. But if not, you guys have the book, you have your resources. This is the intro to chapter 25. This is what I'm going to assign as your reading. Very short, but you've got a big idea question to think about. You've got nice source here. I like this picture. We're going to talk about that, the idea of nuclear attack and civil defense. And you've got a nice narrative here that helps us to understand the U.S. in the Cold War. So take a look at that stuff. Keep up your work because if and when we do come back, and if you are taking the AP exam, you gotta know period 8 and period 7. They're big parts of the test. So hope you all are well. I will talk to you all later.